Quite up. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we broadcast you live from Secwepemc Ulu, the traditional and unceded territory of the Kamloops to Secwepemc. My name is Emily Hope. I'm the Education and Public Programs Director at the Kamloops Art Gallery. And here with me are CHARO NEVILLE, Curator for the Kamloops Art Gallery, and Donald Lawrence. We have about 30 minutes planned for you today, and then we'll open up the conversation to your questions. Some of you have submitted your questions ahead of time when you registered, and that's great. I've got all of those here. If you didn't have a chance to do that, you'll see there's a Q&A box just down at the bottom there. You can type any questions in there, and I'll go through those when we finish up with our program. And you can feel free to chat with each other and with us through the little chat function there. As Don mentioned, he's probably not going to be reading them while we're engaged in this, but I'll do my best to keep up with you. And to let you know, we are broadcasting this live on our Facebook now, and we're recording the video, and we'll post a video of it on our various channels in the coming days. So if you know someone who didn't have a chance to be here today, then that link will be available and you can send it to them later. I'll now hand this over to CHARO.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Sorry, I'm just adjusting my camera. I didn't want to look at my image as I talk, so I'm going to hold my papers in front of me here. It is so great to see so many people taking the time out of their day to join us. This is, as Emily said, our first virtual program. As we're preparing for this program and learning how to do it, I was reflecting that often I do studio visits from a distance, so I'll use Skype or phone calls or emails. Because of our geographical distance from large urban centers in Kamloops. And so this is typically a private curatorial research, and artist studios are usually private spaces. But this pandemic, as you know, has been a catalyst for everyone in our field to pivot and find different ways to connect. And so this has really given us an opportunity to share artist studios in a more public way. And the positive outcome, I guess, of our isolation has also been our ability to connect with those of you who don't live in Kamloops. I understand there's over 80 of you who have registered for this, which is incredible. You know, this is obviously a lot more formal than an actual studio visit. We're going to include pre-recorded videos and some PowerPoints to give you some background. But this is the benefit of using technology. So I'm here in my office. We're coming in one at a time right now. I just wanted to say a few things about the exhibition that will be. Casting the Eye Adrift, Donald Lawrence's exhibition, was meant to open April 9th. So we hope to open it this summer and run it until the end of the year. That's the plan at the moment. And we'll also be opening Anissa Forty's Pleasant Field exhibition in the Cube when we reopen. And so watch for a Zoom studio visit with Anissa and with Craig Wilms, the CAG assistant curator, in the coming weeks. Just some background on the exhibition and on Donald Lawrence's practice before we move into his studio. Casting the Eye Adrift is a retrospective exhibition. So it's representing almost 4 decades of Donald Lawrence's practice. This is the first time of bringing together most of his major projects to date. And rather than organizing it entirely chronologically, we decided to divide it into 2 thematic areas. So at first, we'll look at his early works and Don's interest in the meeting place of art and wilderness by way of his Pinhole photography project, and also his interest in critical restaging of museum display, his detailed site surveying and mapping, and his use of sculptural frameworks with skins. And those are prominent areas that pop up throughout his practice. And then, of course, the second area that will be featured in the exhibition is his camera Obscura projects that reflect Don's interest in the meeting place of art, technology, and science, and site specificity, interdisciplinary research, and participatory context. So this is some of what we'll be talking about today. And of course, there's many crossovers between those two thematic areas, but this is how we've chosen to organize the exhibition. And then the exhibition will include a new work, the Paramount camera Obscura. So with a camera Obscura, you can't experience it in the gallery context. It needs daylight to be able to experience it. So once we install this work on the Paramount Theater canopy, we'll be offering weekly tours. And once we can gather again in groups. And of course, that's the work that is that we're going to talk about today. I'm just going to read a short bio about Donald Lawrence and his practice for those of you who aren't familiar. He's a professor in the visual arts program at Thompson Rivers University, TRU. In 2017, he was the recipient of the Kamloops Mayor's Award for the Arts, the Artist of the Year Award, and was the first chair of the City of Kamloops Arts Commission. A testament to his established commitment to research and teaching, which so many of you living in Kamloops will know personally. Donald was awarded recently with the President's Distinguished Scholar Award at TRU, and from 2013 to 2019, Donald led the Camera Obscura project, a multi-year program of research funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC, that brought together an international cohort of students, emerging and established artists and scholars. An exhibition of this artwork, or this project, was exhibited at the Kamloops Art Gallery in 2016, entitled The Midnight Sun Camera Obscura, which some of you may have seen. And a parallel exhibition was exhibited at the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery and traveled nationally to galleries in Ontario and the Yukon, with publication forthcoming, hopefully next year. This project is an incredible example of Donald's ability to organize diverse participants, as well as his ongoing drive to find ways to connect disciplines and merge academic research, the real world, and art making. This exhibition was followed by a solo exhibition, Kepler's Klepper and the Underwater Pinhole Photography Project. Say that one fast. In 2018 at the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery, curated by Josie Mills. Hi, Josie. And Donald also converted a circa 1927 grain bin into a walk-in pavilion-style camera obscura at the University of Lethbridge Coots Centre for Western Canadian Heritage outside of Nanton, Alberta in 2018. I believe we have a slide of that coming up. People who attended the Kamloops Art Gallery's outdoor new media exhibition Luminosity in 2018, or who have visited the gallery since then, will have seen Donald Lawrence's light sculpture, the Comet 2018, which is currently installed on the roof of the entrance of the TNRD building where the gallery is located. Another thing to mention too is that we're going to be working on a monograph publication that will be produced by the Kamloops Art Gallery following our exhibition, and that should be available next year. That's enough from me for now. Over to Don. So to let you know that he is in two screens, two boxes. One is showing his workbench, and there he is in his studio. Hi, Don.
Hi, CHARO and everyone. I'll start off just by thanking the Kamloops Art Gallery for this event, especially CHARO, the curator, and Emily Hope, who's being coordinated everything both behind the scenes and as you see now, and Margaret, the director, and all of the people there. And also thanks to the CAG for the exhibition, which is on pause, and your collective patience in getting it up and running whenever we're able to. Let's see, so where we are at the moment is we're in my house in Kamloops with Darlene Kalinka here. And we're in the basement where I have, as you can see, this kind of workbench. It's kind of a bit of an all-purpose space at the same time as set up for a little bit of finer woodworking and stuff like that. I've got 2 or 3 spaces that I use. A couple more here. We'll go into the garage where there's a more general kind of workshop space. And the work that we're going to look at today, I actually began on Gabriel Island, where I've got a bit more working space there. And sometimes I work up at CRU as well. So anyway, what we're looking at here, I think CHARO would like me to talk about it to get us going here, is this model, and it relates to what we'll go and look at outside. So it's a model in progress, as you see, of the what will be the Paramount Theater once the remaining 3 letters are created here. And so it's the theater that's right across the road from the Kamloops Art Gallery. And so as CHARO says, we'll be using it as an off-site project, an off-site camera obscura in conjunction with the Casting the Eye Adrift exhibition. And the theater is run by the Kamloops Film Society these days in the last year or so. And that's really great. The Kamloops Film Society, like the Kamloops Art Gallery, is a kind of a really important cultural institution here. And John Fulton, who's kind of one of the lead people in that, has actually been hugely helpful so far, and is himself an alumni of TRU. So what I'm doing for the project, and first the model itself, I've been working on this over a little while, and it's been kind of a chance to do some woodworking and stuff like that, except for cutting out some like big chunk of wood somewhere. Otherwise, I've just been using kind of hand tools like planes and chisels and stuff to make it. So it's been kind of a bit nice, slower process that way. The camera obscura itself, which we'll see outside, this is the model of that in progress. And so where it will be located in the actual theater is right on top of the canopy here above the street level, and somewhere right in around there. If it fits, it'll fit somehow. And just below the 2 marquees that you'll see if you know the theater. The entrance to the camera obscura will be through a doorway that's here. And so weekly participants will go up into the theater, go upstairs to the projection room area, come out and enter into the camera obscura here, which we'll see in some of the video footage outside. So I'll stop there and see where you want to guide me next, CHARO.
Yeah, Emily has kindly prepared a PowerPoint so that we can look at some historical cameras obscura as a starting point for, maybe Dawn, you can just first explain how does a camera obscura work, and then take us through these historical origins.
Sure. That first image is perfect for that. And maybe just with a couple of little devices here. So the basic principle of a camera obscura, and I know many of you are really familiar with this, is that if you imagine, let's see, I'm not sure how well you can see it here. If you imagine a small aperture, we'll use the O of Paramount here for that. A small aperture, which can be either a lens or it can just be an open aperture, usually referred to as a pinhole. Then if you imagine a light ray, and we'll use this file for a light ray, basically light passing, so let's say this is the subject, and let's imagine that over where I am, we're in a kind of a darkened enclosure with the aperture between the 2. What happens is that light rays, light reflecting off the subject or whatnot passes through the pinhole or the lens and creates an image inside the darkened space of the camera obscura. And the image will be upside down and backwards in there. A really nice description of this comes from Shen Kuo, a 10th century Chinese philosopher, who described it this way. He described the light rays passing through the aperture as being like the oar in an oarlock of a boat, that what's up in the subject will be down in the image, and what's down in the subject will be what's up. I think it's a really nice, simple understanding, as a philosopher would be apt to come up with. And so that's what you see here in the first image. This is an image from 1545 by Gemma Frisius in Northern Holland, in what would be called Northern Holland now, which perhaps more properly called Friesland. And he created this image, woodcut in 1545, and it's the first known image of a camera obscura. And so it depicts this, this crossing of light rays through the pinhole and the darkened image inside. What it's showing is it's showing an image of the sun, which is for Demophrysius representing a solar eclipse from the previous year, and projecting an image of that solar eclipse inside what would be the darkened space of the camera obscura. And so in its day, in the 16th century in this case, it was the high-tech optical device. It was the way to view things like this. And this particular image, this kind of cross-section look-in view of the camera obscura, it kind of begins a kind of a trope of such images. And so you see in later publications, you see these images becoming more and more elaborate, but basically following the same formula. Let's maybe go to the next image. Okay, this is an image in one of Roger Bacon's treatises from probably about the early 13th century in England. And I wanted to show this one for a couple of reasons. One, these kind of more diagrammatic sorts of images that you see, they're familiar to us from the sorts of drawings that we see of early renderings of perspective texts and whatnot by people like Viator and Alberti in the 14th and 15th centuries. But they come from these studies of optics and of physics. And Europeans such as Bacon in the 13th century, they were kind of transitional, sort of between what we later see as being the images of the camera obscuras themselves, but also earlier texts, which I don't have an image of here, but in the 10th and 11th century, the primary scholarship around early studies of optics and physics was coming out of Islamic culture, and the primary theorist there, Ibn al-Hattam. And so many of these diagrams that we see today have their roots in that time period, and Hattam and others around him were themselves studying earlier texts coming out of Greece and Roman fragmentary form by people like Ptolemy and Euclid and Aristotle. And even, of course, for those of you with the philosophical background, Plato's Cave is perhaps the earliest description of an optical projection. Okay, let's see what's next. Okay, this is the Royal Palace in Dresden in Germany, and in around the early 16th century or so, this part of Europe, like Northern Holland, was a real kind of center of this kind of study. And one of the rooms that's up here, one of the gable type rooms, dormer type rooms that's set into the roof, was in around the early 1600s. Was a place where Johannes Kepler, usually thought of as a mathematician and astronomer, conducted experiments with the camera obscura, and he described a lens being held up to the window of the room and an image floating in the air. And I was first drawn to that from the writings of Sven Dupré, one of the people in my camera obscura research group. And what Sven wrote about, which I think is quite interesting, is the meeting place, not only of art and science at that time, but also learning and play. And he described the activities going on in these darkened chambers as somewhere between science and magic and the occult even, but also these playful activities, and that scientific knowledge could only advance if the participants were engaged in social play. And we'll see that reemerge with the camera obscura later. Next image, which is related to this. Across the road from the Royal Palace is the Mathematician and Physique cabinet, basically a building existing in rebuilt form from its earlier days in the 16th and 17th century. So it's a really great museum where you can see a kind of an intact collection of this stuff. And this lens that you see here, it's a journal sketch that I did of it in 2014. The whole thing would be about maybe 1.5 feet high. Shows this very special lens. And Sven Dupré and Michael Corey, the curator of the museum, have collaborated on these writings where they've taken various objects in the collection and traced their provenance, where they came from and what they were associated with. And it's not known exactly what this lens was used for, but it's known that it was associated with mathematical instruments and other important optical objects. And so it's perhaps one of the lenses that might have been used by Kepler or someone like that at that time. And then later put into this very fancy Baroque sort of housing. One thing that interests me about it beyond that is the profile shape of it from the side, that it's basically in the shape of the lens of a human eye. And so it makes me think that maybe they were trying out the shape of the human eye as the ideal lens form. Let's go to the next one here. And so that relates to this, obviously. It's an image from about a century later, early 1657, from René Descartes' Dioptrique. And it shows, obviously, someone imagining themselves looking inside an eye and seeing the image projected on the retina in the back. And that's, of course, an idea that we, of course, take for granted today. But it was at this time that these understandings of human and animal perception were figured out. And Descartes and people around him did this by freezing an ox eye and dissecting it and then seeing the image cast inside its retina from the back. And this really confirmed understandings of not exactly human perception, but optical projection, which had been theorized by the Greek and Islamic scholars a century and a millennia or so previously. And one of the other researchers in my group, Petran Kokelkorn from Holland, writes about some of these works and talks about them. And what interests him is that even though there's a kind of an apparent scientific understanding here, the full nature of perception wasn't understood at the time, not that it necessarily is now, but it was thought that inside the brain somewhere, there was a little kind of almost like a little miniature theater that people would actually, in some microscopic way, kind of view this projected image in, much like a miniaturized version of this thing that's going on the Paramount Theater. Okay, next image. As much as I can, which isn't as much as I would like, I go off and do these kind of studies of these historical places and do them mostly through a drawing kind of activity. So this was a study of the Royal Observatory from this past summer in Greenwich near London. And it was built, designed and built by Christopher Wren in the around later 17th century, late 1600s. And first occupied by John Flamsteed, the first astronomer royal. And so it became known as Flamsteed House. The small building on the right was a summer room that was built for them, added onto it. And it had a camera obscura in it that changed over time. The first one in there would have been a telescope that passed up through the roof or through a wall perhaps and cast an image inside onto maybe onto the wall or maybe onto a small table inside. Of which there are written accounts, and that then forms a kind of a model for later more public cameras obscura. Let's go to the next one. Sorry, I'll stay on this. Sure, that's good. Stay there. So it's around that point, around the time of Descartes and Flamsteed's time, that the kind of scientific understanding of the optical properties of the camera obscura, that's about when it's best known. And there's not a huge amount more to learn scientifically from it. Although they have been used to photograph black holes in space and things like that. And what you see here is a portable camera obscura. And so during this same kind of time period, artists were using these optical devices, and Vermeer's use of the camera obscura is probably the most popularly known of that, and one of the best examples, a kind of a small portable one. What you see here is a tent type one that was designed to take out into the landscape, and that would have been taken on the Grand Tour and on various kinds of expeditions, things like that. And it's right around this time, so say 1820s, 1830s, that photography gets invented, and it's a kind of a slippery slope between the images projected inside these devices and then the fixing of them on paper. So let's go to the next image. And you see here, just a little bit later, but it shows a kind of a popularization of the form. So it goes from the kind of preserve of court culture through science and art, and through the 19th century becomes something in the popular imagination. So this is an advertisement for octobullion from about 1900 or so. So by this time, in any technological sense, it's a somewhat obsolete device, but a very popular one nevertheless. Okay, next image. And kind of descending down from ones like the Camera Obscura and Flamsteed House, these permanent structures, permanent public structures started to emerge in the 19th century, and many of them, like this one, in existing structures that were converted. So this is a walk-in Camera Obscura in Dumfries in Scotland in the 1830s, converted from a windmill tower into this theater, and by pulling the ropes, the attendant would take an image of the surrounding landscape that scans around horizontally and also tilts vertically. And that image itself, it kind of interests me. There's almost a little bit of a trope of those, of different people posing beside these photographic tables. Next. This is another such structure, another drawing from this past summer. And so another one of these ones that people can go and visit today in Bristol, England. And roughly around the same time, a wealthy person owned this building and converted the top of it into a public Camera Obscura, and there was an observatory on top of the other building, but it blew away in a windstorm or something like that. Okay, next. And so what you're seeing here and in the next image are these different kinds of drawings, rather than being sort of a kind of almost illusionistic like the previous couple. These are kind of more like a blueprint sort of approach. So kind of like these really careful, detailed measurements of virtually every piece inside these structures. This one looking at an elevation view, looking sideways at it. And maybe go to the next one, Emily. The next one, a plan view looking down. And they aren't on to scale. That doesn't matter to me. They're just information. And then if I want to, then I can take that back and make scale drawings from them. And most of them just sit in my sketchbooks like this, but they've pushed me to have a really kind of close look at these places. And if the right project or time emerges, then I'll make plans from. Okay, next. I forget what's next. Okay, this is another type that emerged. These kind of small pavilion type cameras obscura that emerged at seaside resorts and places like that. And this one's at Margate Pier in England. And my father talked about visiting a very similar structure at Eastbourne Pier, where his family would go for summer holidays. And there's none like this still existing, but there's a couple that are somewhat similar. Go ahead. And I think this might be my last image in the history here. Another study from the Isle of Man and the Great Union Camera Obscura. This one's a little bit different. Rather than having just one single central projection, it's got 11 separate projections, each of which goes down to an individual little kind of booth. And such an image that you see in there might be very much like the sort of thing that Kepler and Flamsteed saw in their Camera Obscuras. And this one's a really nice example of a Victorian pavilion from the 1890s that still exists, basically intact. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. And I've also, maybe I'll just show you a couple of other things here. I've just got some of these postcards here. So you've seen them already, but like a couple of those ones. And I like to think that maybe this woman on the right is actually the same woman that might have been this projectionist in this older black and white photograph, but I'm not sure about that. I showed you this one, suggesting that it's the sort of one that my father might have gone into, very similar. I've also got this old admission card. Let's see how well that works. This old admission card from a Camera Obscura at the Crystal Palace in London that opened in 1851, and this one's from 1877. I know that my grandfather went there at some point before it burned down, so I like to think that maybe he actually saw this, but I have no idea. This one, I'll just show this last one here. This one's a more simple box type Camera Obscura, and so this might have been the kind of thing that Vermeer would have used and was the kind of technology in existence at the point where photography invented. Okay, so I'll stop there, see where you want to take me next, Cheryl.
We do have another PowerPoint prepared or we can shift over to talking about your cameras, Obscura. I think we counted about 7 to date, with the newest one making it 8. They're large, ambitious projects. I'm wondering, maybe you can walk us through these works and talk about how it relates to your practice.
Sure, I'll do that, and I'll try and speed up what I say about them a little bit. Maybe that was a bit long. Okay, so this is the first one. It was from 1987 at York University in Toronto. So it was a walk-in camera obscura, as you can see, with a simple pinhole. And once people were inside it, then it rotated around. And so they would get, you would walk in a circle around the base with it and push it in a circle. And it sort of provided a kind of a moving panorama of the York campus. Go ahead to the next one, Emily. And so it was this inner structure that was suspended in this outer exoskeleton and just turned around as you went. So again, these kind of planning drawings are important to my work, and some exist for this present project as well. Let's go to the next one. It shows a model for it, I think. Yeah. This was actually a previous design for it, and I ended up shifting the design. But both of these works, from the model and the one that was actually built, form maybe a basis for a later, more recent one created in 2015, Emily. And it was created for the Midnight Sun Camera Obscura Festival up in Dawson City, Yukon, which was this event that myself and colleagues imagined and hosted up there. And we had these kind of off-site camera obscuras all over town, together with kind of some panel discussions and lectures and things like that, and a couple of exhibitions, including one by the students. So I think you get the idea of this from the other things so far. So go ahead, and it just shows the structure of it with this sort of table on the inside. So it gives you an idea of what one of these things looks like. And you know, on the one hand, it's a fairly complex thing to build, but conceptually it's very simple. It's basically taking that 19th century idea and understanding that historical form through actually making one and showing it to people, and making it as a kind of a take-apart kit that can be set up at festivals and things like that. Go ahead, next one, Emily. For a number of years, I didn't make camera obscuras, but I made kind of related things. So I made a number of pinhole cameras that operated underwater, like this one. And so pinhole camera is basically a camera obscura that you put film in it, and that kind of thing. So so it kept that whole interest going for me. And then it resurfaced when I was invited to create a work for Ice Follies in 2008, Emily, which is an event on frozen Lake Nipissing in Ontario, and hosted by the WKP Kennedy Gallery. And it invites, Dermot Wilson, the curator, invites artists to come out and create structures that are a takeoff on ice fishing huts that sit on the lake. And so I imagine this, this kind of overburdened structure built on top of a boat that would sit on the ice. And as the ice melted, it would theoretically at least be floating there. And inside it's set up like an ice hut. The boat for it, you can go to the actual thing, Emily. The boat for it was made by a friend, Andrew Wong, and given to me for the project. So that was really nice. And this will be in the CAG exhibition. And all of the works are pulled out onto the lake for the Ice Follies. And then they're set up there for the opening event, where they get about 600 or 700 people coming out and walking out on the ice and seeing these projects on opening day. So it's a real success. And the aperture for this, again, just an open pinhole, is on the front there, and it projects an image inside. We have a photograph taken of me in there by Liz Lott. So again, this gives you the idea of the inverted image. This made me want to, so this one is kind of an architectural folly. It's something that's maybe a little bit more, it's built, but it's not a totally practical thing maybe. It made me interested in actually being in a boat. It was a camera obscura. So let's go to the next one. So I took one of my folding kayaks. These are German kayaks, this one from the 1970s. That you don't see it apart here, but the whole kayak comes apart into a kind of a kit and gets assembled. And so I took it to Tasmania for an artist residency in 2011 and built this designed and built this structure beside it here, which also is a take apart structure. Let's go to the next image, I think. Yeah, so the whole structure comes apart like this and then gets assembled over the kayak as in the next image, like that. And then the image comes through a lens in the front and rear projects onto that little screen, and then is viewed from behind, rear projected. Go ahead, Emily. And these are some clips from a video that I made paddling around with it in Tasmania. So this one and the next one. Okay. And for most of this, I was towing a small little barge behind the kayak with a camera on it. And that's the image inside. And so I had to get used to how to kind of navigate with this thing, which was a totally different experience. Okay. And there's something that I know interests CHARO is a kind of a transition in my work around this time, maybe from these kind of less privately inclined works to ones that are more public. And so this is a floating camera Obscura in False Creek in Vancouver, realized with other sites for artist projects in 2017, and building on an earlier project with Eastern Edge Gallery in Newfoundland in 2014. And so the whole thing again is a kind of a take apart kit that's assembled on the beach at low tide. And then as the tide comes up, it floats and then it's towed to its location. And then people enter into it by kayak. And the lens on the front emits the light, which creates a projection inside. And so people inside, such as Jana Sasaki, look up at the projected image, which we'll see here of the surrounding skyline. Again, inverted and backwards. And so, of course, the image is flickering and moving with light, and as the thing sways with the tide a little bit and then the wind, that kind of thing. So this one really kind of puts people inside the experience of kayaking as well as, and kind of getting out into nature, or in this case, False Creek. And then this one, we'll jump into this one, is a camera Obscura that kind of clings to the side of this ferry that crosses the Yukon River up in Dawson City, one of the works created for the Midnight Sun Camera Obscura Festival. And so it's viewed from the back. There's a close-up coming up, and then people would look in the back of it, as we'll see with the next one here, I think. These canoeists on the ferry looking in the back and seeing a rear projected image inside of the Yukon River. And as the ferry goes across the river, which it did 24 hours a day, then it gives this kind of moving sort of panoramic image of the river end of Dawson City. Emily? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Model showing how it works. So you see here kind of a, yeah, okay. And there's the image of Yukon, so Yukon River. And so that would just be a kind of a moving panorama the whole time. And coming up to the last work, which is also, aside from the one I'm working on, kind of the newest one. This is in Nansen, Alberta, just near there. The Coots property that CHARO mentioned, owned by the University of Lethbridge. And so this project realized in partnership with the University of Lethbridge and the Hess Gallery. And so this is how we promote it, which is what we believe. So let's go to the thing itself. It's this former grain bin from the 1920s, one of the earliest ones around this part of the prairie. And the next drawing shows it kind of imagined that, nope, sorry, that's it, converted into its camera Obscura with a lens mechanism on the top, and then a gearing mechanism that moves to the inside. The lens on the lens mechanism on the top was something I designed, and then it was fabricated. I think maybe the next image shows it, Emily, if it does. Yeah, so the lens and mirror mechanism on the top, something I designed and made a wooden prototype of, and then Jim McCarthy up at TRU in the welding program helped put it together. Let's go back to the other one. So this drawing is sort of the conceptual drawing for it, and shows how it works, and changed a little bit, but that's more or less the idea. This was my favorite drawing done on an airplane. Two more images, and I think it's the last one. And this shows the view inside this quite large projection table that I built with the help of a couple of research assistants. Okay, that'll do.
In the exhibition, people will have the opportunity to see many of those projects. One-Eyed Folly is the only one that we'll actually bring into the gallery, but as you can see from the model here, this Don typically makes a model for each of these, and so those will be in the gallery to see, as well as documentation of those projects and all the ephemeral material and sketches that go along with that. Thanks for sticking in with us, everyone. It's hard to estimate all the time.
I figured I talked too long.
There's just a lot to cover. We do actually have a series of 3 videos to show you next. And this will be a way of us merging into talking about the current work that you're making, and for me to grill you more on the conceptual underpinning of it all. Emily's titled them, and I think that we're just going to let them run as we talked on.
Yeah, good.
So this is showing the Comet and the exterior of the Team RD building where I am sitting right now. And the banner that we've now has become a place for artwork. And so that's one of the images that Donald showed, a detail of the lens. And then this is the site, the Paramount Theater, with the canopy where the camera obscura will rest, and people will go inside the theater and then come out through the tent. Maybe you can just set this one up, Don, and then we can roll into chatting some more as we look at the work.
Sure. This is the workshop in the garage space just out back here, which you'll see a bit more of in a sec, I guess. And so this is making the mount for the lens, and with a kind of a built-in shutter in it, which appears somewhere later on. So it basically walks through the process. For what you saw at the beginning, there was a kind of a simple wooden prototype that I made of it. I'm just laying out the metal one, and then, as you'll see, cutting it up and drilling pieces of it, and then assembling it. And then after that, then we'll see I think then we see yeah, so this is a kind of cutting it on the bandsaw and whatnot. And after these scenes, after the lens is assembled, then we see the camera obscura itself, which is set up in the backyard. It kind of just fits there, and going inside it, and you see the lens mechanism from the outside at least. And then we'll be inside the camera obscura, and that goes on for 2 or 3 minutes, so 3 or 4 minutes maybe. So maybe while that's on, maybe we can just you can ask questions and things like that. Sure. Yeah,
you're right. I'm interested.
Well, let me say one thing. Just a second, maybe I'll just go to one other image here. I'll hold it up to the camera. What you'll see is a green tent, and so the image of the family tent is kind of really important to this work, and kind of fits with my long-standing interests in camping and that kind of thing. And when CHARO and I were looking through materials for the exhibition, we actually found this old grade 2 primer with this image of a family tent in it. And although I didn't know it at the time, the tent that I have for this project looks very much like this one in the book.
Can you open it up a little closer, Don, and shove it up close to your camera? So you made this drawing when you were 9?
7, I think.
7, sorry.
6 or 7. Which also might mean, I don't know, my siblings would know this better than me, but might mean that it coincides with a road trip we made from Toronto to Maine, then later to Maine in 1969. So it might, it's probably a recollection of something from that trip.
And there it is.
There, it looks similar.
Yeah. So you're right. I'm quite interested in how these works operate outside of the gallery context. In part, that they require daylight to function. So that was our interest in having you make a new camera obscura work, was so that people could actually have the experience of going inside one, which we can't represent in the gallery. And much of this work, all of this relates to your early interest in the meeting place of urban and wilderness settings, and of course bringing together your interests in outdoor activities like sea kayaking. And there's this kind of romantic nostalgia about this, about pre-photographic technology, especially those seaside resort pavilion camera obscuras from the 19th century. And then there's these romantic associations also with getting out into nature. And as you mentioned, the magic of that image, there's something totally uncanny that happens with a landscape or even an urban setting that you see again for the first time. It transforms what you think you see in that projected image. So I'm wondering, I'm gonna loft you a question maybe about speaking to the site-specific nature of these projects, and then also your underlying critique of that romantic relationship to nature, because this is a thread that ties much of your work together.
Sure, I'll do the site-specific one first. I'll go in that order. I like the way that any new location prompts, to some degree anyway, a kind of a reimagining of the technology and the problems to be solved. So certainly creating the pinhole cameras to operate underwater presented all kinds of challenges to figure out and make work. And likewise, creating the kayak camera obscura, the one that I'm paddling around inside, it wasn't just a matter of figuring out how to build that and the logistics of getting everything to where it was going and all of that, which is part of it, and descends from those kind of large-scale expeditions of in the 19th century to various parts of the globe. You know, that's part of that whole romantic tradition that anyone that's involved in those kind of outdoor activities today is a descendant of. But any particular location has its own demands, and I like the way that prompts me to keep rethinking the technology and how to make it work. The floating camera obscura in False Creek, again, is I think is as good an example of that as any. And in very simple terms, just the way that this has to be imagined, not just to hold the tent, but also to fit into this particular space and to figure out the route of access and theater seats that go in it and look that way. So each one might be solved in a totally different way, depending on what the site is. In this case, the site's the Paramount Theater, so it's got a bunch of solutions that aren't apparent in the other ones. The part about, I'm not sure if that totally answers that, but that's a start on it. The part about the romantic aspects and the critique of it, that's true. I think of that being an aspect of my work that goes back to at least the late 1980s, and I think of it as first emerging in an installation I did in my fourth year as a BFA student, where I constructed a landscape inside a friend's apartment, Calvin White's apartment, and it kind of took that landscape that he and I and another friend, Brad Cope, were really familiar with, and put it into his domestic setting. So it put the natural and the cultural together. And I've basically carried on with that interest since then, much of which is apparent in the Casting the Eye Adrift show. And that came mostly to fruition, I suppose, with the body of work that I created called Romantic Commodities in 1993, the model of which will be in the exhibition. And it's an interest that carried on in all my work, but I think it's a little bit more latent, maybe. I was making a more overt critique of the way that we commodify natural experience, and we commodify everything about, you know, the right kind of backpack and shoes to have to go out and just go for a half-day hike. So that critique is built into that work. But I think now it just kind of naturally informs some of my choices. So in maybe a less overt way, just wanting to put a work in the middle of False Creek that's with all its boating community is a funny mix of wanting to get out in nature, but doing it right in the middle of one of Canada's largest cities. And and launching from this place called Habitat Island, which is a very interesting part of what's going on in Vancouver at the moment about wanting to reclaim some of these spaces that have been spoiled by industry. And so it's a kind of little natural, small park in the middle of False Creek that's aiming to have its natural growth again. And that was the staging site for the tours out to the Camera Obscura. So it's mixing all of those elements together, but maybe not declaring itself so much as a critique of romanticism as the Romantic commodities did. I'll stop there, see where you want to go next.
Yeah, you've also talked about it being more of a recent development towards social practice. So it's interesting to think about right now as we can't gather in groups, but what your work does is it takes people outside of the gallery context and to a new place to gather and to experience this, you know, a new site, but also this structure itself, and then the projected image, which kind of takes you to another place. Is that something you're thinking about, the social element of it?
It's something I've come to think more about. And as many of you know, for about 10 years or so, I was involved in another large research program that was overseen by World Garrett Petz up at TRE, looking at culture of small cities, using Kamloops as a model, but more broadly than that. And that got myself and a number of the students and faculty involved in it, thinking about the social function of art and getting people publicly engaged in art making. I wasn't using that as a vehicle for my own art making at the time, but I do think it may have had a bit of an influence in terms of how I came to think in later works. And that transition in between about 2010 to about 2015 or so, from when I was making the kayak Camera Obscura, where I'm the only person in it, in this kind of romantic adventure in Tasmania, to inviting whoever wants to show up in False Creek to enter into the Camera Obscura. That for me is that time period is a kind of a transition in my work to a practice that is fairly socially inclined at the moment. And I simply see myself going back and forth between those interests depending on what takes my interest at the time. But I can definitely see a shift in my practice at that time. What I'm showing here is if you imagine there's 3 seats inside this thing. There's a right one, a left, middle one, and a middle one, and a left one. And so it may be that in the exhibition we're able to open it, but with the middle seat being closed or something. So who knows? We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, but our intention is to have weekly tours. So we'll put out a schedule eventually, and 1 to 3 people can sit on those seats and experience it. I think we might wrap up our conversation for now because there are a lot of people who have questions. Do you want to?
We have a lot of questions.
Yes, I'll thank everyone for questions, whether we get to them all or not.
We'll try to get to all
Emily, maybe there's some way to follow up with otherwise beyond, I don't know. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so your first question, this was submitted by a participant through registration. Camera Obscura developed modern day photography. How will the Camera Obscura shape the future of photography and art?
Well, I'll start off by saying I like the question, but I'm sure I'll like them all. So I might not keep saying that. So yes, the Camera Obscura in that period of 1820s to 1830s basically transitioned into what we call photography today and what we call cameras. I'm not sure that in a real technical sense that there will be an obvious impact. I think that the Camera Obscura was part of a crucial period in the development of optics and understanding of optics. It doesn't mean that the Camera Obscura is not relevant, though. I'm interested in the writings of a group of scholars that call themselves archaeologists, Erkki Huhtamo, who I almost had in my project, and Siegfried Zielinski, who in the early 2000s wrote a book called Deep Time of the Media. And he looks at the whole group of them, the archaeologists, look at how technology doesn't necessarily evolve only in a straight linear manner, but that it can go back and forth in time. And this has been a point of discussion between myself and Petra and Kokokor, and that looking back to old technologies can give you an understanding of the present. And so for example, and I think of this relating to others in my work, that even if in a purely technological sense, the camera obscura, I'll say might be rather than is, because who knows, might be technology that's being outpaced, it's perhaps a cautionary tale that all advanced technology becomes outpaced. And so every time I hear someone use the word technology when they really mean new technology, I notice that. This pencil in my hand is a form of technology, but wherever it is, but we would tend not to think of it as technology today. We tend to think of these cameras and things as being technology, but the camera obscura, the crystalline lens in its day in 1500 was also advanced technology. And so it just looks like a chipped up piece of glass now.
That's a really neat point. Next question. Has your artistic practice, so grounded in place, been affected by quarantine?
Oh, well, my whole, I suppose, in most basic way, the fact that we're talking about me still making a model of this camera obscura, and that I've been able to slow down my pace of doing so, rather than people being in the camera obscura. Sure, it's affected it because my exhibition's not open at the moment; it's on hold. But I have been able to relocate my studio, if you like. Well, whatever isn't normally happening here, I've been able to relocate the whole thing to the backyard. So I suppose it has affected it, and certainly if things carry on over time, it will. But I also like the opposite notion that that it's forced me to adapt a bit, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to do here.
Do your portable cameras obscura present any special challenges or benefits relative to the classic stationary camera obscura?
Well, yeah, sure. And I think without even looking at mine, but looking at that kind of tent one that I showed, the portable one, it quite obviously, rather than only having the vantage point from, say, the top of the tower in Bristol or the top of the tower in Dumfries, Scotland, the camera obscura could literally be taken pretty much anywhere. And so they were taken on most major expeditions, I would imagine. And then, as the bullion cube ad shows, used by pretty much anyone who wanted to acquire one or just make their own. So the portability gives you the opportunity to view the landscape and to rethink it pretty much anywhere. The challenges are sure, you have something, you may have something heavy and awkward to pack around with you, or you can just take something simpler like a sheet of black plastic or something and make one on site. So, and then I know I talked about this before, so I'll just keep it brief here, but the whole idea of trying to make a more complex artwork in some other site, yes, it's challenging, but it makes you learn more about the site and learn more about the technology in the process. Which is kind of like me working with you to try and get this whole thing working.
You're very adaptable. Okay, do you develop an idea first, then find methods and materials to manifest those ideas, or is it the other way around?
It goes both ways, and again in a kind of a back and forth way. Here I think I really noticed this with the underwater pinhole photography stuff, because I would build the cameras here in Kamloops, and then I would take them to the coast to use them, and then maybe they would work, or maybe they didn't, and I would take them apart on the beach with screwdrivers and stuff and get them working, kind of like getting an old car working or something. And then I'd come back and then redesign a new one and make an improved version. But I had to use them in the field and learn how to use them to know what wasn't right about the design in the first place.
What is the role for the camera obscura in 2020?
It's a little bit maybe like I talked about that other question, the first question. I think that ruminating on any older technology, if you're savvy about it, should give you pause to think about new technology. And I know I talked about it in terms of technology becoming obsolete, but again, anyone that's familiar, for example, with Foucault's ideas of the panopticon will, if they're not aware of it already, will see the camera obscura as being a device of observation and whatnot, and tied to that tradition. But if looking at older technology makes you reflect on newer technology, then we might say the same thing about any of these devices. So I think it's a tangible, hugely historically important tool that continues to make or provide viewing of these very kind of poetic images, but can also be a tool for critiquing technology in contemporary society.
Is an image from a camera obscura polarized? If so, are there any applications from it, such as seeing images underwater?
I like the question, but I don't understand it, which doesn't mean I don't get the question. I just don't know the answer. I guess I don't know. One would only know by making one and trying it out. I think that it would only be polarized if you put a polarizing filter, or say you had a pinhole one, if you put a polarizing filter over in front of the aperture or the lens, then like any camera, I suspect you could rotate the polarizing filter to polarize light to see the clouds darker, etc., to look into the water. And what's key in there maybe is that although it's the low-tech device compared to a film camera of the last century and a half, or digital cameras, the light coming into the device is still the basic principle. So if you affect the light coming in, it'll affect the projected image inside.
It's a pretty good answer, seeing as how you started out by saying you didn't know. Okay, we have
that in class.
We have 3 more questions.
Okay.
Emily, are you also seeing that Adrian's put a question in the chat?
I did not see that, but I will. Oh, I see it now. Yes, I will get to.
Add
So
that.
4 more questions. Laura Breed says, I remember seeing a project you did while kayaking of taking photographs with a pinhole camera submerged in the water. Were those photos processed on site or transported and developed afterward?
A good question. They're all processed on site. And that's important to it because although in an exhibition or something like that, you might see one photograph of a starfish, there could well be about 10 of them or so before that didn't work. And some of them might just be not as nice, or some of them might be totally black or totally clear or covered in sand or blown away. That doesn't happen. That only happened on a drawing in the art gallery once. So for each one, there might be many others. And so for that reason, it's important to process them on site. So some of those photographs, they happen the first time. Others of those photographs, I might spend a day or so before I get one image that I like. But that again, it can be frustrating a little bit. You keep pulling out another one after working on it for an hour. And the tides changed in the meantime, and the lights changed. But that's all part of kind of figuring out how to not just take a photograph of the landscape, but actually work with it. So the process of taking those photographs would not just be finding something that looked good, but thinking, okay, what's the right time to photograph that? When will the light be right on it? When will the tide be at the right point? That kind of thing. I forget the exact question, but that's the answer.
You answered it. Follow-up question.
I'm sorry, but let me say one more thing because now I remember the question. The way they're photographed, they're a little bit like a coffee cup. The film's put into the coffee cup, and this could be used as a camera obscura. The film's put into the coffee cup and is exposed under the water. And then a valve on the camera is opened up and developing solutions are poured in and then poured back out. So the camera is also its own developing tank. And if I'm in the kayak making them, that's how they work. If I'm on shore using it, then I have a kind of a portable processing kit and I take them out of the camera and put them into the portable processing kit.
We have a question about your setup for this kind of thing. What kind of setup do you use to record your work in progress? As an example, the studio work shown that was sped up in this presentation. Do you use a video camera on a tripod or other, and what software was used to edit it?
Some of this question is going to go back to Emily. All the footage that you saw, the video stuff, was simply taken with my iPhone. It's a new iPhone, whatever model that is. So nothing, I was going to say not complex. Of course it's complex. Nothing that any of the rest of you might not have. I have a digital video camera, and I have tape-based video cameras. And if I was doing a more involved project, I would probably use those. Again, the kayak cameras, maybe this question was asked earlier before, some of what I talked about when I did the video of the kayak camera Obscura in Tasmania. I used 3 devices for that. I had a GoPro camera. I think it was the first year they came out. I had a GoPro camera inside the camera Obscura, and I had a tape-based video camera on a small little raft that I towed behind the kayak. And then I also had an audio recorder. I forget where I put that so it wouldn't get wet. But so those 3 things picked up the images together, and then I edited them on Final Cut Express. I did all that editing in Tasmania, and that's not my natural domain. So each time I do something like that, I have to kind of relearn it. The videos that so that's again a challenge at the time. The videos that you saw today, I took the footage, and with gratitude, Emily Hope actually did the editing on them. So I don't know what program you used, Emily.
Adobe Rush, which is handy because it works on your desktop as well as your mobile devices.
And as the name suggests, probably used based on when Dawn gives you the footage.
Yeah. Okay, we have a non-art practice related question. Are you ready?
Depends what it is, but okay.
What is your favorite dessert?
And my first inclination is that it's coffee. And I will tell you a favorite dessert. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I also can't think of one I like better. Would be a Christmas pudding. It's traditional in our family. My father would always make them, and they would sometimes literally hang around in the basement while they cured for a year or so. And it would be brought out. It would be kind of a ceremony to bring it out. It would have a sprig of holly on the top, and then the whole thing would be heated in brandy and set fire to. And then that would be brought out from the kitchen on a platter into the dining room where it would be dark. And so it would be kind of a little bit like a camera obscura. There'd be this darkened space that this kind of flaming light comes into. And then you have your dessert.
Sounds delicious. The camera obscura's connection to the history of science is well documented. Were they also connected to the rise of spiritualism and magic in the 19th century, making images appear by magic, etc.?
Oh, and I know from the way that you described that must be Adrienne's question. Let's see. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I can say a couple of things about it. Certainly, and I realize the question is specific to the 19th century. I'll come back to that. Certainly, the way that you describe it in the question is much like some of the accounts. As much as they're vague references, they suggest that kind of activity might have happened in those early experiments, like Kepler's experiments in the early 1500s. As Sven Dupre writes about them, certainly it had to do with an element of magic and what's the word I'm like, alchemy, things like that in its day. I realize that's different from like 19th century seances and whatnot. So I don't know about that. What I do know, though, and I first learned about this from David Hoffus, for those of you that know him, was another optical form that emerged around I don't know exactly when, latter 1700s, I think, maybe early 1800s. No, latter 1700s, maybe even earlier, called the Phantasmagoria. And so it would have an optical projection coming from a magic lantern, invented by Kirchner and Anthemius Kirchner. And so the magic lantern would project an image from down below in a darkened space onto a piece of glass at an angle, and the audience would be here, and the magic lantern might, for example, have an image of a ghost, and there could be an actor on stage. I'm getting this a bit mixed up, but an actor up here, and so the audience would see the actor, but they would also see the image of the ghost, and they would overlay one another, and that in its day would have been something that the average person wouldn't quite be able to get their head around. So camera obscura itself, I don't know. It's quite feasible, but the phantasmagoria, yes. So although I haven't given quite an answer to that, I would draw your attention to this book, Technology, Art, Fairground, and Theater, which is Petran Kalkokorin's book. And what Petran traces in here is a whole history of the camera obscura and other devices of technological entertainment from that time period and how they all interrelate. So there would be an interrelation between the camera obscura and the phantasmagoria for sure, given their time period.
Okay, so our last question. Can you speak on form versus content in your work or in photography? Is it enough for us to have made an image with a pinhole? How important is the image versus how it was made?
Okay, I'm going to come back to, again, this might be a personal take on one recollection rather than a really comprehensive answer. And, in part because it's going to vary from artist to artist, and the relative importance of the two is going to be understood differently at different periods in time, including reflecting back on those times afterwards. Like, for example, in the 20th century, we have the formalist movement in roughly the first half of the century to latter 2/3 or something. And so certainly form and content were understood by hardcore formalists to be one and the same, more or less. That's a simplification, but more or less one and the same. Yet in hindsight, much of that work can be understood in political and other social terms, and also much activity that went on behind the scenes, including by many of the formalist painters and whatnot, would be seen to have different interests. So they weren't necessarily interested in one thing, even if they're most interested in formalism. My own example that way, I think of them as interrelated. I don't see how they wouldn't be. But I do know that when I made the first of the underwater pinhole cameras, I kind of got it working in the backyard. And I remember I can keep experimenting with this and I'll get it to the point of getting a good image. But I thought, rather than doing that, I'm just going to go to where I want to use it. So I took it to Nanaimo and used it on site and came up with an image of a starfish. And that was the content, if you like, was the starfish. The form was the pinhole camera, but it was really only by putting the two together and getting that form that I wanted, that content that I wanted with the form, that I thought, yes, this is complete. That putting a kind of a formalist lens, if you like, onto something that's anything but formal work, but for anyone that could get that subtlety. But it suggests to me that the two go together. One might be more important than others at different stages in a process, but for me, the two go together. I know that the design of the cameras, it's not only a practical problem. I'm also interested in the way that they're a mixture of a kind of a bricolage, if you like these fancy yachting things like pulleys and stuff like that, and other day-to-day things like plumbing parts. So I see that kind of composite also as speaking to kind of both the form of the work, but also almost like a kind of a social dimension of it. I think I strayed.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. More questions keep coming in. So we're gonna have to decide whether we wanna keep answering them or call it a day.
What happens with the overall timing? But I'm sure you're aware of it. I see we're 14 minutes over. I don't mind at all, but I don't know how the forum works.
We can keep going. Margaret says to shut it down.
So why don't
Ernie
we
can
take a
ask
couple?
his question over coffee.
Okay, how about one more question and then I'll stop? Is that good, or do you want to stop?
We can do one more. Do you want Ernie's or Hamish's?
Oh, okay, let's take Hamish's. Well, let's hear it first, then maybe I'll take Ernie's instead. But let's take Hamish's.
Okay.
Ernie can ask.
Hamish asks, is it the quality of the image or the psychological effect of seeing what is real captivated in a defined space that makes the camera obscura so captivating?
It's the psychological effect of seeing it. The quality of the image varies, and I think for someone making these things, you're always happy when it becomes this very crisp, very lucid kind of image. But from seeing people in these devices, it matters a little bit less to them. They're almost more entranced just by the magic of how this is happening to begin with. And so a soft focus image can be captivating to people. And then it's almost like value added if you bring it into focus for them. But, and that's much like the experience for me too, to some degree. And I think that even though this is technology now that's, a few hundred years old, the magic of it sounds very simple and poetic, but I think anyone that knows these structures will agree, there's still a kind of a magic to these images and the surprise to them about that. And if I'm showing someone the camera obscura in Nanton, the one in the grain bin, the most common question is, how does it work? I take it to be kind of obvious, but it's not. I've seen viewers be very surprised by the images in that camera obscura, even when it's explained to them. So it's something basic, kind of magic, maybe not quite the right word, but something beyond reasonable, beyond obvious understanding to the average viewer, I think. And that's got to be in some kind of psychological realm, regardless of how well refined the image is.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And
Hamish is my brother, by the way, one of my brothers.
So like we said at the beginning, we have recorded this today and we'll put it up on all of our various channels in the coming days. So if you'd like to watch it again or share it with your friends, please do. And thanks to everyone for coming, and especially to Don and CHARO for your great words today.
Again, especially thank you to CHARO and Emily.
Look forward to seeing everyone in the gallery when we open the exhibition.